All right. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for joining us for our Monday morning Data is Love. I am super excited to introduce you today to Jaconda Nelson, who's the CEO of Diversity Window. And like all moms in the world right now, she has been hustling to get her kids out the door and go to school. And I just found out that school starts at like 10:30 a.m. Which is wild because I grew up in India where school started at like 6 a.m.
Yes.
And you just kind of sit there for like 12 hours. So America, take note. Um, Anyways, super excited to have you. Will you just start with telling us a little bit about yourself and how you landed the super cool gig at a DEI tech startup?
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Aparna. I just have to say I'm so honored to be here. I remember our very first conversation, oh my gosh, about 4 years ago. And I'm always excited to connect with people who are doing true equity work, inclusion work, and to see where you are now and the work you're doing at Moving Beyond. I'm really excited. I wanted to publicly say that. So thank you for having me here. It really is an honor. I joined Diversity Window because I believed in its mission, and it was founded shortly after the murder of George Floyd. A lot of organizations, as you know, Aparna, because you were deep in the trenches too, were doing this work, wanting to do more around equity and inclusion and racial equity work. And the co-founders. Really wanted a way for organizations to absolutely, make these commitments, right? But how are you actually like making progress? How are you measuring that? What data are you using? And you and I both know a lot of organizations aren't using data, especially when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so I was just really excited about the idea of driving DEI work through data, really benchmarking where you are, understanding where you are, being honest about where you are, and then being able to track and measure your progress. And I think a part of that data too is a sense of transparency
Mhm.
around what that means and what your commitments are and holding yourself accountable. So I was tapped to come and join and grow the organization, and been pretty amazing.
Oh, I love that. Being honest with where you are. Say more. Like, how does that move our field forward?
Yeah. I think, and I'm saying this as someone who's been a DEI practitioner, right? And I'm very proud to
Hmm.
say practitioner because oftentimes, we may think DEI is let's do awareness months, right? Let's celebrate every month, which is absolutely amazing. But
Hmm.
being a true practitioner, when you think about a doctor, right? If you go to the doctor, a doctor is not just going to assess you on one area of your body. They're going to say, I use this example all the time. If you break a toe, the doctor's not just going to ask you about your foot or your ankle. They're going to ask you, what are you eating? How are you sleeping? What environment are you in? What access do you have to healthcare? A whole broad range of data. And so the way we approach data is not just about who's represented in the organization, right? And not just who's represented, but also looking at the comparisons of who's in your kind of frontline service or kind of, in that space compared to leadership. And we know there are gaps typically there across a lot of organizations when it comes to underrepresented or underinvested, communities, but also the culture, right? That's a data point for us. We know that you can't drive diversity, equity, and inclusion work if your culture does not support it. So how are you assessing your culture? Another big thing is how are you tracking inclusion and belonging? You can bring diverse folks to the table, but if they don't feel like they belong, they're not going to stay. And so for us, when we talk about really, number one, seeing people where they are, meeting them where they are, and pushing and nudging them along to do more, we are assessing who's represented, where are they represented, do they feel like they belong? What are some gaps in your culture that cause barriers for that? And you hear a lot of organizations, they can tell you like, hey, we want a more diverse leadership team. We want more diverse talent in our candidates that come into the organization. We want to keep our diverse talent, but if you can't measure that, if you can't track that, and really pinpoint where you need to focus your efforts, you're not going to move
Hmm.
the work along.
Yeah, and I think that, you and I have like been watching the the organizational ecosystem where the answer to the culture problem tends to almost always be employee resource groups,
Yep.
right? And they're like, hey, Black and brown people, or LGBTQIA folks, or parents, go ahead, like meet up with other people that are like yourself. And that's our culture fix, right? And by the way, can you continue to help us diversify our organization and like attract talent that looks like you? Um, I've been thinking a lot about one of the stats that you shared with me last week, which is that 3 out of 4, right? So 75% of job seekers, actually, I think it's 76% of
Yep.
job seekers see workplace diversity as being one of the most important factors when they're evaluating where they want to go work, right? But at the same time, like companies are not sharing that data at all. I mean, we know that, for instance, when we look at, S&P 500 or 1000, or like the companies that are on a Russell index or a Fortune index, something like 2% are sharing just demographic information
Yep.
that they're legally supposed to be sharing and
Yep.
making it really easy, right? So how are people supposed to make decisions about where they want to go work if they don't actually have that information?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, for when you think about again DEI work and how organizations are getting it wrong, right? Let's just be honest. You saying you have a employee resource groups is not a DEI strategy. Having a DEI committee is not a DEI strategy. Typically, there's that one lone person who is likely a person of color, and they're like, hey, you go fix this issue. There's no
Mm-hmm.
resources involved. There's no support in terms of people actually doing the work. There's no support for someone to do that data, which is a lot of work as well if you're getting really good quality data. And so, again, I would say if you have to do a financial audit of your organization, which most organizations do, you're not going to go to a
Yeah.
marketing person and say, hey, marketing person, can you help us with this financial audit? No, you're going to go out, you're going to spend money on someone who's qualified. You're going to get the right data because you're going to expect them to come with the skills to do that work. And once you get your, results, and if you're lacking in a certain area, guess what? You're going to build a finance team to make sure when that financial audit comes along next year, you have done the
Yeah.
necessary work. And so we need to see diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the same way. You have to invest resources, you have to make it a focus, and you have to put action as you're planning for your business strategy in place to really focus on moving the needle. And people are looking at that. I mean, gone are the days, and I mean, and kind of millennials got this kind of bad rep of like, big dreamers and wanting to be the CEO, like as soon as you hit the workplace and make millions of dollars, right? 2 days after you graduated high school or going to college, right? Because we grew up on that you can be anything, you do anything, posters and
Yep.
keychains and all of that, which is great, right? I think it's a great characteristic to have. But we also have shifted the workplace, and then you think about the generations that are coming after us. It's not enough just to
Mm-hmm.
pay people, like
Yeah.
it's not enough to just pay people and come and do the work. People are connected more deeply to meaning in their lives, and not just outside of work. People want to see it in the work. They want to see their organizations make commitments. We talk
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of organizations, connected with so many people. And one of the biggest things that actually comes up is like, I just want my leadership to even talk about it, right? And so, how are you measuring your leader communicating, right? Like, how is this showing
Mm-hmm.
up when they're out talking about the organization or talking about how they want to bring their employees along, right? And so, it's just really important to make it a priority by investing dollars and talking about those dollars, by
Yeah.
investing resources and talking about those resources. How amazing is it for
Mm-hmm.
someone who's looking at an organization to see their leader, CEO, leadership saying like, hey, we have a team, we invest this many dollars, not only internally, but in community. We are focused on bringing this particular underrepresented population along in leadership, and we increased it by this much. I think people are afraid of data because it brings a level of accountability that no one likes. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of laugh because this weekend, my daughter came to me and she's like, "Hey, can you take us to the park?" And I'm like, "Okay, give me a little bit of, give me about 5 minutes." Guess what my daughter did, who's 8, by the way? She went to the refrigerator and turned on a 5-minute timer. and, and said, "Okay, I'll see you in 5 minutes." What did that do? Number one, it gave us common language to understand what was going to happen in 5 minutes. It
Mm-hmm.
was going to hold me accountable to wrap up whatever I was going to do to get her to the park in 5 minutes. And guess what? I was a little anxious because I'm like, gosh, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to do all, clean this in 5 minutes. But it was a level of accountability there that made me move faster to do it because I knew I was going to have to answer to someone, right? And that's what data does. And it's scary. It's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that about kids these days. I mean, I can't imagine putting a timer on when I was 8 years old and been like, "Hi, mom, it's time to go." Um, earlier I heard you say that if you need to do a financial audit, you're not going to hire a marketer. And it makes me think about, I think, a lot of the conversations that are happening in the practitioner community where I see a lot of people posting about, how did I get my DEI job, right? And a common theme is what you really need is passion, right? Like the secret is passion. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. And I kind of had a snarky moment with a friend this weekend, and I was like, well, if passion was on the basis for which I was going to find a doctor, then I might not have a foot right now because, like, what the heck? Like, I want to know that they were board certified. They were in like the top of their class, like they did all their exams.
Yes.
Passion, like, is that like the sole basis to enter a profession? So I'm just curious, with respect to the practitioner community, and then I want to talk about leaders. But with respect to the practitioner community, like, what are the conversations we need to be having to move our field forward?
Yes, and it's so funny. That is true. Like passion is great. Passion is great for a lot of things. Okay, passion, it can't
Hmm.
be trained or whatever. That is absolutely a great quality. But
Yeah.
again, when you think about the work, and I had to learn this along the way. Luckily, I had a background in community organizing, so I truly understood the need to do true systemic work in order to get the
Mm,
outcome. So that was like that was a practitioner, right? Model that I use when I come in organizations. I've been calling myself a corporate activist, right? Because that's actually what it is. You're changing a system and working on the system to really produce DEI outcomes. And so I think, for the person who's tapped, which is again how it usually happens, the person that's tapped, whether it's the one HR person or the one person of color who was leading an employee resource group and now they want to do more, ask yourself, number one, like build your business like acumen and skills. Understand your business strategy and understand how to tie every single thing that you do for DEI to your business strategy. I had to learn that very quickly working with operations leader because guess what? Operations leaders, they just get stuff done. Like the stories are amazing. Yes, I want to
yeah.
feel good. But when they have to operate, especially for global organizations where your footprint is huge, they are focused on getting stuff done and they are all about the numbers. They're all about how many
Hmm.
resources I'm going to need. How do I build
Yeah.
it into my schedules? All of that. So understand your business and understand how you connect DEI strategy to that using data, right?
Hmm.
And then really think about how do you partner across organizations? You have to be able to partner to get work done. One of the most common, I think, traps that DEI folks are folks who are tapped to do the DEI work, they're not given enough resources, they're not giving dollars, they have to beg for budget sometimes and don't know what to ask for. Build your DEI strategy with other people. Build it with your talent folks, build it with your marketing folks, build it with your operations folks, community folks. You have to learn how to partner and scale and not take the responsibility on for yourself. Because guess what? Yes, I agree. We need to diversify this organization. But as a DEI leader, you're typically not overseeing talent acquisition. You're typically not
Hmm.
overseeing the recruiters. You're typically not making decisions about where you use your resources to actually go and find talent, right? Partner, but you have to really be clear around, you're not an owner of those things. You're a consultant, right? And you're driving that through partnership. And then I think the third thing is, I kind of use this joke because my kids teach me a lot, right? Be honest about your leadership, about what you can do with what you have. When I'm out with my kids, hey, can we stop by Starbucks, Mom? Well, how much money do you have, kids? I have $2. You don't have Starbucks money. You have Dollar Tree money. Guess what? You can go get two things and be happy from the Dollar Tree because you have Dollar Tree money. You have $2, okay? You cannot go to Starbucks. So that DEI leader who has been tapped, you will wear yourself out. You will break yourself down because you can only do as much as your organization is willing to invest. And if they're willing to invest Dollar Tree money, you better make the best out of that Dollar Tree money, okay? And don't, gone are the days of these expectations to deliver Starbucks quality. And I love Dollar Tree, so I'm not trying to even compare the two. But if you have $2, you're going to get more value at the Dollar Tree than Starbucks. And I think that's another common trap is like, and it's like any other business, like just really truly think about what it means, the resources you have and what you can actually do.
Oh, I love that. I often say, like people want like white glove service, like a Crate and Barrel white glove service on an IKEA budget, right?
Yes.
And not even like the all wood IKEA
Yeah.
furniture, like the plywood IKEA furniture that you're going to put together and it better not move ever.
And lose a screw on the way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean that's something that I often find myself reminding folks is you need to make a plan with who you are today, who your people are today, and what
Dang.
resources you have today, right? Like it
Yeah.
can't be an aspirational pie in the sky because then you're never gonna get there.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to change gears just a little
Yeah.
bit and talk about leaders because they are so important to this
Yeah.
work either taken off
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
just kind of being in like status
Yeah.
quo, lukewarm state, right? And one of the things I've been thinking about is, and this has been happening for years, right? All kinds of research every couple of months. There'll be some splashy Harvard Business Review article
Yes.
about greater diversity drives profitability. Like companies that are more diverse have X amount more in revenue, you
Yeah.
increase shareholder value, right?
Yep.
So we've been hearing this for a very long time. The
Yeah.
business case, right? The business case for DEI is more money.
Yeah.
Why is it not a bigger incentive? Like if you could have 20% more,
Yeah.
right? And like anyways, like you're chasing that.
Yeah.
Why are leaders and companies not incentivized by that promise of greater
Mhm.
profitability to collect the data, to
Yep.
share the data?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard work. I mean, it's hard, right? Like, we didn't get to the issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion overnight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they've been here for hundreds of years, right? Just by the way workplaces were created
Yeah.
historically. So it's hard work, and I think also too is, again, if people don't have the knowledge around what it actually is, we can talk to people. Well, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? Some people will tell you many different things, right? We haven't even got clear around what does it actually mean. So I think that has something to do with it. I think, not putting the resources right? Like that's probably the number one reason, right? Not having the right resources to do the necessary work. And that goes back to not understanding what it takes to actually do true transformational DEI work. It's typically done in a silo. Some DEI leaders are kind of buried deep even within the organization, so they don't have a level of authority or responsibility. They're not given budgets. Oftentimes, DEI budgets have to be asked for versus, hey,
Mm-hmm.
as a CEO, CFO, COO, chief financial officer, chief operating officer, building the budget for an organization. DEI is typically not carved out in that conversation to say, go figure out what we need to do and come back. And then we have to beg, it's not given the right resources is needed. Also, again, data. right? Where, if you don't, one of my favorite business leadership books is Jim Collins' Good to Great. And I love how he talks about the analogy of the bus, right? With your people, with your resources or whatever. He's like, you have to number one, have a map of where you're going on this bus. Number one. So what is the vision? What are you actually trying to accomplish? And then you also need people on the bus, resources, money, dollars. And then you also need people in the right seats on the bus. Again, don't ask an HR coordinator to come and build a DEI strategy for your entire global 1,200, however many people organization, if they don't have the skills, the tools to do that, right? So it's a combination of all these things. The data is your goals. like the data, that is your goals, that is your map, that's where you're trying to go. Being honest about where you're trying to go. I wouldn't want to get you a partner in the car with me and say, hey, we're going to go to Snoqualmie, Falls, right? And then I'm over here going to Ruston Way, right? Like, you'll say, well, I thought we were going to Snoqualmie Falls, right? And so, really getting clear around what do you need to accomplish for your business. There's a business aspect and there's a people aspect. You have to do both, right? And your people aspect comes into creating a space where they actually know what you're doing. They feel a part of it. They can actively contribute. They can show up, right? And do the work. And so I could go on and on about that, but I think resources is definitely number one, and just getting an understanding of what it is. And that's where our DEI practitioners really have the opportunity to do that and be that voice. And I saw we had a question, but I didn't get to see it. Sorry.
Yeah, Jose said there's a gap between what companies say and what they actually do. And that comment actually brought up for me something I heard one of my customers say to me last year. I was, sitting and talking with her, large healthcare organization. And I said, hey, like, isn't leadership interested in reducing churn in this one rather large department of the organization? And I'll never forget what she said. And she said, like, she didn't even bat an eyelid. She was like, look, like, racism is just built into the cost of doing business. So the fact that we're losing people because of it, it's part and parcel of this business, and leaders have accepted. And I think that, there's that part of the racism being built into the cost of business. But I think that there's also just like meritocracy built into the cost of doing business, right? Like,
For sure.
who is allowed to fail, who's allowed, we just, I think, watched the CNN Plus and Quibi last year, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars just kind of like right overnight, and then DEI practitioners are asking for like $10 to buy a hummus for a meetup. So what I know, data, of course, creates accountability between what companies say they're doing when they're actually doing, right? But we don't actually have a ton of insight into what's happening inside of them. And so what would you want like employees to do and ask for?
Yeah. Definitely data, which is typically hard, especially because they're like, oh, we got to check with legal and HR and, all of these things. Use the data that you do have access to. And that's what I tell people, because, and I tell this, especially to clients all the time, especially if they're coming to diversity, looking for help. Sometimes they're looking at other organizations, which I'm like, hey, listen, this work is big enough. If we're your partner or not, I'm just going to tell you, as Jaquana Nelson in the world, like as a human, just start. You have to start. You can't wait for all the pieces to get in place, right? So whatever data you have, use that data, right? So if you have, most organizations have access to kind of your EEOC, or equal employee opportunity data, right? So your race, ethnicity, gender, I think veteran status, disability are kind of the core. You can create ways to get data. So one of the things that we do is we create inclusion and belonging, right? An index that is again, it's not just pulling some questions together and asking folks one time and being done. What are you going to use as that measure to make sure people belong within the organization. And what we do at Diversity Windows, we have certain themes, right? Where it's like you are measured along like team management dynamics or teamwork dynamics management, or your perception of the organization in terms of equity, in terms of do I have fair access to opportunities, promotion, et cetera, right? So measure something. If you don't know what that looks like, reach out to us at Diversity Window, Moving Beyond. We are here to support you. There are many organizations do it, but you have to start somewhere. And that's where your DEI practitioners can help you do that if you don't. So if you don't have someone in your organization to do it, ask for resources to get folks who know how to do it and start there, right? Measure how many people are coming into your teams or leaving, who's leaving your organization, right? That's very telling around where you can start the work. How are you engaging people? How many hours are you volunteering in communities that represent the organizations you want to serve but haven't been able to do, right? So, really start with the data that you do have. Use that as your starting point. Be very honest about it, right? Again, when you go to the doctor, they are asking you some very deep, intentional questions because they need you to be honest to figure out how to fix the problem. If we're not honest around where we are as an organization, you're not going to be able to move the work forward. So be honest about where you are. And again, if you don't, if you have a DEI leader, resource them. Give them money. Don't make them go beg for money. Carve that out of your budget as you're planning for your business, because again, you're going to get that, 19% back, right? Because you're going to see an increase in revenue, but you got to invest. As with anything, you got to invest. If you want to do better around communications, you partner with a big organization, a PR firm, to help them get your marketing off way, right? Do the same thing for DE&I.
I love it. And I'm also loving all the doctor analogies. And I definitely lie to my doctor all the time when they're like, are you getting 8 hours of sleep? I'm like, 8, I'm getting 10 hours of sleep. All I do is sleep, like, are you eating green vegetables? I'm like, the greenest, every day, 5 meals a day. Right. Yeah. And of course, I think that we've all learned that when we hide things from our physician, our financial advisor, our partners, like it creates problems, and it's not solvable unless it's surfaced. You got to name it. You have to name it. All right, we have only a couple more minutes. And so, we've talked about practitioners, and we've talked about, employees and like DEI leaders. What is your advice or invitation for someone that's sitting in the C-suite, that's looking at risk management, they're looking at profitability, they're looking at all of these things, and they're terrified. They're terrified to even publish their EEO-1. What's the first baby step that they can take?
Yeah, I mean, number one, just be open, because typically those leaders don't see and hear the stories or the experiences that are happening right in their organization. So as a leader, you are accountable for that, right? You are accountable to how people feel when they walk through the door or when they're engaging with people, whether it's virtual or whatever. Like, you are responsible for that. Like, just as you're responsible for your targets and your revenue and all of those other things, you are equally responsible for your people. So number one, be open and be ready. It is messy work. But again, you got to go to some data points, right? And sometimes hearing the stories of people is a data point. That is a data point, right? Like, I would always do the work and say, like, I have to be vocal about this. I have to push. I have to be bold, because I hear the stories of people literally calling me crying about not being able to do their day-to-day work because of a manager who is, doing these inappropriate things when it comes to my race or my, gender or whatever, right? Like, you have to be open and ready and be willing to take where, like, listen to where you truly are, and you have to invest. I mean, invest is like the biggest thing, right? If there's a leaky hole in a business, and leaders know that it is causing them financial strain, they're gonna go and invest to fix that problem. Hold DEI equally as important to that, right? So you have to invest and start where you can. They can start more, right? That's where accountability comes in, but that's a different conversation. But invest, right? Really invest. But those are kind of the three things, really. Like, just be open and ready, because it's messy work. It's not fun. It's hard because we all have to, even me as a DEI practitioner, I have to do the same thing, because there are different experiences that I don't always understand or never had to think about. So how am I showing up too? Be open, start where you are, be honest about where you are, and then invest in the problem.
I love it. That's the biggest takeaway. Resource people, invest in them.
Yeah.
Um,
Be honest with where you are.
yeah, be honest with where you are. And I think that, we've seen some really cool data coming out of companies like PayScale that shows us that transparency is gonna make people stay and feel committed more so than even like having pay equity, right? Just tell me what's going on.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm right? I'm going to be better off knowing that something is happening or it's taking
yeah,
time, or than to completely be in the dark. And I think that that just is our, like, how we function as human beings, right?
yeah,
I'd rather know. I'd rather know that my mom is not taking me to Starbucks,
yeah,
than for her to be like, yeah, of course, like let's talk about it.
yeah,
Yeah, of course. You want the thing? We can talk about it, just not
yeah,
right now.
yeah, yeah,
Versus let's take your $2, go to Dollar Tree, make it happen. Everybody's content.
yeah.
Um, Thank you so much for
Thank
making time for this
you.
conversation. Um, I just want, like, I love meeting other practitioners and leaders who are moving in a direction that's going to help create a more sustainable world and a happier, more content workforce, because life is too damn short to
So
just
short.
be working in places that make
Yes,
you unhappy, that don't care for you. Um, you can follow Diversity Window.
yes,
Um, they have a great website. They're on
yes,
LinkedIn.
yes,
Please connect with Jaquanda. And yeah, and we'll be back. We'll be back next week,
yes.
to keep
Wonderful
having more
series.
of these conversations. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Have
Thank
a
you.
great
Thank
week,
you so much.
everybody.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.